Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
We want to thank you for joining us. Some of you are new to the Microsoft Political Action Committee, and we appreciate your support and activism. I think this is a particularly special event. That I do want to point out that the MSPAC speaker series will kick off again in the new year with an array of speakers. For a congressional preview, we will host local Congressman Jay Inslee and Adam Smith. That'll be on January 11th. Ron Reagan will join the MSPAC the latter part of January, while Ambassador Paul Bremer and Congressman Doc Hastings will visit the campus for MSPAC talks in February. Now, if you'd like to include your colleagues in these sessions, simply have them sign up online at http MSPAC. Okay, so http MSPAC. Well, today is certainly a great honor for me, and I think for all of us. It's an honor to have Senator Ted Kennedy here, but I also want to have a special welcome to his wife, Vicki.
Thank you very much.
There really are few remaining legends in government whose careers have witnessed our nation's history and shaped our future. I want to remind all of you that the Senator has represented Massachusetts in the United States Senate for 43 years. His commitment to public service began in 1962 when he was elected to finish the final 2 years of the Senate term of his brother, Senator John F. Kennedy, who was then elected president in 1960. Since then, Senator Kennedy has been reelected to 7 full terms and is now the second most senior member of the U.S. Senate. Kennedy has led the battle for accessible and affordable health care for every citizen. He has also championed education and immigration reform, a raise in the minimum wage, and workers' rights. Now, within the technology world, the Senator has been a leader on universal broadband deployment, health, IT, and trade priorities. Senator Kennedy is the senior Democrat on the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee. He also serves on the Judiciary Committee, where he's the senior Democrat on the Immigration Subcommittee and on the Armed Services Committee. And I want to add a personal note. I've had a couple of great opportunities to spend time with Senator Kennedy. We were in the Crow's Nest not long ago, and he made a very interesting suggestion. He said, Microsoft really can help our country on the issues of health care, and in particular health care IT. And the way in which he framed it for me is he said, look, if Microsoft did the right job, we could save this country tens of billions of dollars. So why don't we just turn this over to Microsoft and we'll split the savings.
That's exactly
together.
Right.
See, I remember.
That's right.
Well, we might not be able to execute on that business priority in exactly that way. The thing I loved about his suggestion is it's the kind of aspiration that our company stands for and cares about. We can have that kind of impact on society. We can make that kind of contribution. And it's a great honor to be able to work with somebody of the stature of Senator Kennedy on something that is such a great aspiration. So we're very thankful today for the Senator's time, but in particular for his leadership. He has agreed to provide some brief remarks and then take your questions. And so please join me in welcoming Senator Ted Kennedy.
Thanks. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Thanks, Jeff, for your very kind and warm introduction, your introduction to my wife, Vicki. It is true that we did have that conversation. The bottom line, I don't want to get away from what we're going to be talking about today, is that for every health dollar, 33% is a non-clinical. There isn't a business in America that could take that, or any organization, any place that could take it. And the idea of what IT could do in terms of reducing that, even down to the 15 or 18%, even what Canada has, or most of the European countries down to 12%, you'd be saving about $300 billion a year. I'd be willing to split it with Microsoft and use the rest to get universal coverage myself. But that's another issue for another time. Thank you very much, Jeff. Jeff was kind enough to mention that I've been in the Senate for a long period of time. I can remember when I first ran for the United States Senate, I was 30 years old. And what I said, what the United States Senate needed was a young man with new ideas. Now I'm running for the United States Senate again. I say there's nothing like age and experience and all of those issues. I've been doing an oral history about the time that I've been in the United States Senate, and I told the oral history about my first experience when I first voted in the United States Senate. I went over to listen to the debate, and there was a fellow named Willis Robertson from the state of Virginia. He's actually Pat Robertson's dad, and he made this very passionate speech in favor of the issue. And I was convinced that I ought to vote aye. And then it came to Kennedy, and I voted aye, and it came to Robertson, and he voted no. And I was somewhat surprised by that. And as he walked on by, I said, Senator, I said to Kennedy, I've just gotten elected here. I listened to your speech, and then I listened to your vote. And can you explain it to me? And he said, Senator, in my state, on this issue, the people are evenly divided. Those that favor the speech, those that favor the issue, I send my speech. Those that are opposed, I send my vote. And I said, I think I can make it here after all. I want to acknowledge right at the very outset the great affection and respect that I have for your two really outstanding senators. I work with Patty Murray on our Human Resource Committee on the issues of education. I work with her on a variety of different issues, but education is one that she brings a very special understanding and awareness to, and she is a knowledgeable, passionate, concerned person, speaks on the floor of the United States Senate knowledgeably and persuasively, and a very, very special role for us, for those that care deeply about education. And Maria Cantwell has been really an extraordinary fresh breeze in areas of technology, areas of energy, areas of a wide range of new kinds of innovative opportunities. She has been selected by our party to be sort of our lead person in these areas, and does do an extraordinary job for you. Both are dear and valued friends to Vicki and myself. As we all know, the challenge to Microsoft 2 decades ago was to create word processing that would be available for all. And today the challenges are very different, yet Microsoft continues to lead the way in action and innovation, both in the world of technology and meeting the challenges and the need of globalizing the world. We face a complex and competitive world. Many exciting opportunities for growth lie ahead, many of them based on innovations in information technology. It is essential to embrace these technologies in our hope to meet the challenges of globalization in both domestic and foreign policy. Already in healthcare, we're creating new approaches for this century of the medical sciences. Microsoft guided the world from the typewriter to the computer, and we all hope you'll guide our healthcare to a better future as well, as we struggle to move from paper and X-ray film to digital patient records. We live in an age bursting with medical miracles. Diagnosing a faulty heart valve or a blocked artery once meant risky and traumatic exploratory surgery. Today, doctors make the diagnosis with a miniature camera and a fiber optic cable, and the patient can walk out of the office moments later. A few years ago, it seemed inconceivable that anyone could decipher the entire genetic code, the very blueprint of life. But today, doctors across the globe can read that sequence on their computer screens and use the information to find better ways to treat cancer, diabetes, Alzheimer's, and many other major diseases. These remarkable discoveries, and countless others, are a tribute to the genius of our researchers and the insight, skills, and innovations of our computer scientists. Deciphering human DNA was as much a triumph of computer science as it was of medical science. The new field of bioinformatics is revolutionizing the medical research. Projects that once took years to complete can now be finished in days. Scientists can ask sophisticated questions about the structures of cells, molecules, and how the cellular components interact to carry out the wondrous and intricate process of life. This new understanding is the solid foundation on which better drugs, better treatments are being built. Information technology is helping revolutionize the discovery of new cures, but its potential has barely been tapped to deliver cures to the bedside of patients. We waste countless hours waiting for lost charts to be fished out of distant archives or for tests to be repeated. Doctors often have to treat patients without complete information. Lives are lost from avoidable errors. Billions of dollars are squandered on needless paperwork. None of this should be tolerated in a nation that spends more on health care than any other country, that has the best doctors, nurses, and health professionals, scientists, and hospitals in the world, and that gave birth to the computer industry and the Internet. Obviously, information technology isn't a panacea, but it can help reduce the most blatant gaps in health care and countless avoidable errors by improving coordination of care, guidance to doctors on the best practices in each field, and alerting physicians and patients alike when it's time to schedule preventive screenings. Information technology can also help lower the cost of care by eliminating the costly paper records and preventing expensive mistakes. It can increase coverage of the uninsured by freeing up funds now allocated for administrative costs. It puts better control over health care in the individual's own hands through personal electronic health records and online medical consultations between physicians and their patients. Congress is beginning to see the potential. My information and technology bill passed the Senate last month with broad support. Senator Frist, Senator Enzi, and others. Its primary goals are to set national standards for the technology, fund the adoption of IT across the country, spread the benefits of this new technology to as many patients as possible. Hopefully, the legislation can be signed into law by the end of the year because it's long overdue. Some people say it's unrealistic to expect computer systems to be powerful and versatile enough to transform health care and also be convenient for doctors to use. But a decade ago, no one expected doctors to be advising patients by computer. You've already conquered barriers that many once thought insurmountable. Microsoft employees will be among the first to use electronic health records in online doctor consultations. You've made it possible for people to collaborate on a single project and exchange files on the Internet. You've taken computer power that was once the domain of major corporations or the military and made it simple and inexpensive enough to fit on a handheld device. Your potential is my passion, too. But we as a country need to embrace that potential and stir enough passion to continue advances in technology that will keep us as a global leader in innovation. We need to make a long-run commitment to greater funds for research and development if we are to continue to grow and maintain our global economic edge. We cannot let the U.S. lag behind other nations in the high technology areas where we have previously led the way. This means both direct federal support for R&D and incentives to private companies to invest in cutting-edge research as well. We continue to be a leader in government-supported research, but increasingly China, Japan, and other fast-growing economies like Ireland and South Korea see the immense potential of basic research for economic growth. China alone doubled its investment in R&D as a percentage of GDP over the last 10 years. To foster private investment, we need a long-term commitment to the R&D tax credit. Year after year, Congress keeps extending it, but always a cliffhanger, so companies hold back, and it's long past time to make this tax credit permanent. Congress is likely to extend the R&D tax credit through 2006 again without making the credit permanent. The Senate passed its tax bill that included an extension through 2006, as does the House bill, which is not yet passed, though my colleagues in the House tell me that it will be included in the final bill. Microsoft has been a leader in research and development, and the tax credit has clearly been crucial in stimulating other private companies to invest in innovation too. We need to encourage this activity, not keep instilling doubts about whether we're genuinely committed to advancing new technologies and achieving their potential. In fact, private investment in R&D is not enough to keep us competitive with fast other growing economies. It's often federally funded research that primes the pump for future innovation and commercial application of new technologies. Yet, as you well know, federal funding of basic research in engineering and the physical science has seen little or no growth in the U.S. over the last 30 years. We can't let this trend continue. Federal investment in R&D comes primarily through the Department of Defense, the National Institutes of Health, the National Science Foundation, and we need to do better in all of these. In many areas, government has to take the lead. Government-funded and university-developed basic research had a leading role in creating the Internet. Microsoft itself was instrumental in taking the transmission control protocol and the Internet protocol developed under the Defense Department and commercializing it along with other high-tech companies. Commercializing federally funded research is what drives jobs and drives our economy forward. Innovation is important for its own sake, but it creates jobs both for those doing the research and for those bringing technologies to the marketplace. Companies and research organizations alike rely on strong investment in R&D and highly skilled workers to develop new products that keep our economy in high gear. To do that, we need long-term national commitment to R&D so we can attract and retain the best and the brightest students and employees the U.S. and the world have to offer. As you all know, immigration is a hot button item these days on Capitol Hill in Washington and probably in Capitol Hill in Seattle, too. Immigration is a critical element of national economic policy and productivity, and we have to do a better job of adjusting to the rapidly changing world. Our laws can't afford to hinder legitimate international commerce, travel, and immigration. Our economy counts on billions of dollars spent each year by foreign tourists. Universities reap the intellectual benefits of attracting the best international students. Our whole scientific establishment thrives in a climate of open exchange, and our economy increasingly depends on researchers, professors and teachers, accountants and engineers, and computer professionals from all lands. Curtailing legal immigration in a way that reduces the flow of foreign professionals or foreign executives and managers will undermine our economic competitiveness and leadership in the world. We need to strengthen temporary visa programs, even as we make sure that companies don't misuse them. I've worked with Senator Arlen Specter on a bipartisan compromise to provide temporary relief for the shortage of H-1B visas, which support our competitiveness and global leadership, and hopefully will soon be signed by President Bush. Obviously, we also need to have a stronger commitment to educating our students today for the high-skilled, high-tech jobs in the future. We need to educate elementary and secondary school teachers who can offer better math and science education to young students. They need access at all levels to the newest and best technology to enhance learning. We're still far behind in making sure that schools are connected to the newest high-speed broadband technologies. All of these issues, in terms of education and others, are enormously important for our future. Over the years, Microsoft earned well-deserved renown for promising the digital revolution. Your Unlimited Potential program serves a crucial need in providing technology and skill to underserved areas. Your generosity is touching as well. Massachusetts has received nearly $40 million in cash donations and software, and we're very grateful for your leadership and commitment. We admire as well your impressive commitment to online safety for children using the Internet. Finally, it's very important as well to not let other countries look the other way when software and other products are pirated. We know the huge potential for your products overseas. I was astonished to learn that 90% of all software installed by the Chinese government itself is pirated. We can't let this continue. Many of us in Congress are urging our trade negotiators to include strong piracy protection in the free trade agreements and the World Trade Organization negotiations. Fair trade has to be on the table in any discussions on free trade. The future of information technology is limitless, and I look forward to working with you now and in the years ahead to see that we can achieve as much of its immense potential as possible. Thank you so much for all of your outstanding work. Thank you. Good.
Senator, if we have time for a few questions, I'd ask everybody to line up here. We'll take them, and just one question per person if you would, okay? So just come up to the mic.
Thank you, Senator, for your remarks. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the assault on intellectual property that we're kind of facing now, both with an antiquated patent system and also with things like open source software, which isn't competing successfully in the marketplace, but is using government regulation and other political means to gain an advantage?
Well, let me just say that I think the Patent Office needs a major focus and attention. It needs additional kind of support in terms of probably the economic support, but it needs additional kind of help and support in terms of dealing with the challenges that it's facing. It's rapidly overrun, it's over-challenged, it's inundated with different kinds of requests, it's struggling along. But if you were talking about in terms of the whole world kind of a challenge, I think that you're talking about math and science in schools, you're talking about broadband in the United States in every region of the country, upgraded. You're talking about an energy policy, and you're talking about patent and patent reform. I put those elements really together as sort of a central overall challenge about where the United States is going to be within the world community. Some of the particular details, I'm not sure, in addition, that I can probably comment on right now. Yep.
Why aren't the Arab nations more involved in securing Iraq?
Question is, why aren't the Arab nations more involved in securing Iraq? I think, to the contrary, some of them are adding to the additional tensions that we have. For example, Saudi Arabia is permitting its citizens to travel to Syria and go through the airports, and they're being picked up by sympathizers to the insurgency, and the greatest percentage of the suicide bombers happen to come from Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia has refused to sort of crack down on it. The countries in the region that you mentioned there, a few of them, if any, have representation in Baghdad today. A couple of them have councils there, but they are basically staying out of it. Much of the money that is being used to further the insurgency are coming from the related countries in that particular region, and it is really intolerable and outrageous that that is the case. I, quite frankly, think that they have the most to lose eventually. They are going to end up with an unstable matter. I have my own positions on which we really come to or not with regards to Iraq. But whatever the situation, you have an unstable situation in Iraq, the people that are going to be the most threatened are going to be the countries in that area, in the region. They have the most to win and the most to gain. And the failure of the United States to involve them very early on or continuously in trying to find some resolution to it, I think is a major gap in terms of American policy. At the present time, there's very little desire, very little interest, very little willingness on their part to pull this American policy chestnuts out of the fire. And I think it's a defeating attitude, but it's a realistic one, and it will remain, I think, as long as we have those that are currently in charge of the Iraqi policy.
Thank you.
Hello. First of all, I'd like to thank you for coming out. I appreciate this opportunity. I have a relatively simple domestic policy question. Our two great states share something, many industries in common, one of them being the cranberry industry, which is very important this time of year with Thanksgiving. But on a very serious note, for those that don't know, cranberries are very important to both of our states. I actually, on the side, some of us at Microsoft do have other lives outside of Microsoft, and I actually raise cranberries, so it is an industry that I know a little bit about. But
sounds like one of my speeches.
I apologize. My question
keeps going on. I know we're going to get to the point, I think.
I apologize. I was just wondering what can be done.
Buy surplus cranberries?
Yeah, your favorite recipes. No, I apologize. What is done to protect and bolster these, especially in light of environmental concerns? That was my real question, the laughter.
Well, it's not enough. I mean, I think your last question was about what we're doing on the environmental concerns. And then the other remarks I can talk or not talk about cranberries. It's clearly not enough. We have basically seen an administration that's abdicated responsibility just in implementing the basic Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the Endangered Species Act, the other environmental issues. Let me just give you an example. We have doubled the number of Americans that die every single year, most of them children, 85% of them are children, from asthma. Every other childhood disease has been reducing except asthma, and that is lung-related. And those are primarily in the East, where, as a result of lifting and suspending the obligations under the Clean Air Act for those plants that are primarily in Ohio and in the Midwest, the contamination in my state, the killing of our ponds and rivers and streams is just an absolute kind of national tragedy. The lung-related diseases, which are all related, obviously, to the fact that we have weakened the enforcements on the Clean Air Act, are in themselves indicted. The dramatic increase in terms of mercury in the streams of this country and the endanger that has for vulnerable populations has grown exponentially over the period of the last 5 years. You don't just have to take the rules and the regulations or what this administration is trying to do about drilling off in the Arctic. You can just, which is the sort of the focus of many of the environmental concerns. But if you look at the basic enforcement of these legislations, they're not only true in terms of the enforcement. It is cutting back on the various agencies. It's putting people into these agencies that don't believe in these programs. It's cutting back on the enforcement support in these agencies, which is devastating to them. And as a result, we are having a more, and then as a basic failure to recognize the central challenge of global warming, which is an overarching issue for our time, and a complete unwillingness, a contemptible attitude towards the initial kinds of debates and discussions that have taken place. So I wouldn't give a high mark to this. For those that are want more about it, my nephew Bobby Kennedy's book on this that's been out in the last several months on it. It gives you sort of chapter and verse, but it is enormously distressing and disturbing when we were really beginning to make important progress in terms of the preservation and protection of the environment. Yes, sir.
Good afternoon, Senator. Through your wife, Victoria, you have a special relationship to New Orleans and Louisiana. What should we be doing there as a country, and what can we do as a company and individuals to help?
Well, I think you all hear the question. The first was August 29th. Vicky's family, New Orleans, their second home. Family from that area. This morning, reading through the newspaper, saw that the Tulane is cutting back in terms of its math and science. The first thing to go is math and science. I mean, what does this tell us about sort of the challenges that we're facing? We had one agency got it right, and that was the Coast Guard. They understood the dimensions of what was happening on August 28th. The storm hit August 24th in Florida. 28th and 29th, it moved on up to Title 4 or 5 on that. It headed right for those areas. It's going to be a disaster of major proportions in any event. And enough of you have read the history of it about bearing responsibility, but there was a complete catastrophic breakdown. And first of all, we have to recognize that New Orleans, that Gulf Coast, is part of our country. I mean, we are one country with one history and one destiny. This is a part of our own. We have to, as Americans, understand we have responsibilities to our fellow citizens. I mean, that's what our country is really all about. And the failure to really try to come to grips with this issue is absolutely appalling. Absolutely appalling. And I will give you not only about the FEMA and Michael Brown, who was the head of it, and the rest of it. Let me just tell you, we passed in the United States Senate a month ago $1.5 billion for the 345,000 children that have been knocked out of schools. To try, there's $450 million of that to help rebuild the public schools, but we also provided help and assistance to any schools, public or private, or parochial, church-related, because this was an equal opportunity disaster. No preference. I have my concerns about vouchers and all the rest, about diverting scarce public funds for private, but now we've got a disaster that is affected, and we can battle that at another time, not now. That has been sitting over there in the House of Representatives the last 8 weeks on it without good. And there hasn't been a public school that's opened in New Orleans with all of this tragedy. Money in and of itself isn't the only problem, but we have just effectively, if you're looking at these budget debates, pay attention particularly to the newspaper in these next 10 days, my friends. They are marking up what they call the budget in the House today. Yesterday, today, maybe even tomorrow and through next week. And that's going to have the allocation. You'll see whether there's any interest at all and I'm on Republicans. And I'm saying this because this happens. They have the whip hand over there. We carried it in a bipartisan way. We didn't have a single vote against that in the United States Senate. Not a single vote against it. And we have Republican leadership playing games with this over there, just on education. This is away from the housing. We have a special responsibility on the education. Our response to this has just been one of enormous tragedy. Incredible heroism and bravery and decency from the American people. I mean, we had 420 guests came to Otis, our air base up there, and the people poured out. And people came on in there to take care of the children. We had our technical task force on Cape Cod came to work with the children and teach them how to use computers. I mean, it was extraordinary. The generosity. We've had parishes in Boston black parishes, mostly black, a few white, that have adopted families. We'll take a family, we'll find a home and job, we'll just give us 1 or 2 families. That's as much as we can have. It's been extraordinary at the grassroots level, but the gross incompetency, the national level is something that people should be, not only fired, but I don't know what else you can do to them, but. So I'm not a happy camper on the kind of part, and we've got to do better. We should, and we've got to follow along. Yes, sir.
Senator, thank you for your many years of service. It's a hard job you do. You may have heard Microsoft just announced a $1.7 billion continuing investment in the India market, and I remember back to the 2004 presidential election. There was a lot of discussion around outsourcing. It was a hot-button issue, if you will. The words were flying all over. But since then, I haven't heard much about, at the national level, any legislation. And I'm curious, from your perspective, what is going on in terms of discussion and legislation around outsourcing?
I think in the presidential campaign, the principal focus was on sort of blue-collar jobs that are going overseas. Now, of course, you have not only blue-collar jobs, you got the research. It's going over in Bangalore. You know, the Intel's 2,400 jobs that are there. GE, one of their 7 or 8 principal research areas are over there, and it continues along. You've got the Chinese graduating 650,000 engineers. The Indians, 350,000. The United States, 72,000, and half of ours are foreign graduates. We don't know quite where they're going to go. They're going to be here, stay here, go back, or whatever. And so this is the new reality. This is the new reality that we're looking at. That's why I think the efforts are so commendable. You know, the foundation, that Gates Foundation, in terms of what they're doing in the math and the science, and also in terms of the training programs, is enormously important and very, very creative. We've seen, let me just talk about this for a minute. We've gotten in Boston $25 million from the Gates Foundation that is very, very targeted. We have a first-rate superintendent school. There's Tom Paysan, who was the deputy to the Secretary Riley in the Department of Education. And in the last NAEP test, they're the ones that are the national standards, not the state tests. The NAEP are the national standard. They're the ones that really count. And we had, in terms of the disparity between on Hispanics and whites, nationwide, the reduction was 9 points. We were 22 points. And in blacks, we were 15 points, African Americans on 15 points. We had the greatest progress in reducing disparity of any urban area in the country. I mean, these kinds of investments that they're talking about, if we're taking these things seriously, can make an enormous difference in terms of the moving ahead from K through 12. I just want to make that point as a sidebar. Let me answer your question this way. We as a country have to decide whether we're going to get consumed by globalization or whether we are going to be able to deal with the challenge and equip every individual. Everyone in this room is equipped, but equip everyone in the state of Washington and the state of Massachusetts to be able to deal with that. That is the issue that is before us as a country and as a society. That's what we ought to be talking about. How are we going to make sure that we as a country and we as individuals are going to be able to deal with this, and so that every individual American feels comfortable with the challenges that we're facing around the world on it. That, I think, is the challenge. That ought to be that ought to be the issue in the 2008 campaign. Ought to be the issue in the 2006. We ought to be talking about it now. There's not a hearing on it. No one's talking about it. Otherwise we're going to get run out of town. I mean, we're going to get run out of town unless we do it. And within that context, the things that obviously have to be done. We need the math and the science. You need the education, the continuing training on this. We've got to begin to deal with our health kinds of issues. I mean, all of these other kinds of issues can follow into that. And that, I think, is where we ought to be going. That is what I believe. I believe very deeply on it. We're trying to do this with our education programs. And I was going with my chairman, Enzi, into Bangalore. We were going over there in April, look at what's happening in Singapore in terms of math, other interesting things other people are doing, and we have to get this country challenged. You know, let me just mention, when I first got into politics, we had just finished a war, which we were successful, and then we helped rebuild countries. And we got them, those other countries, they built democratic institutions, but they also become a part of the world community. We all benefit. You look at the quintiles in terms of income, all America benefit. Everyone went up. We were all in it together. And at home we faced the greatest domestic challenge, which was the race issue, which our founding fathers failed. They wrote slavery into the Constitution. We fought a civil war. We still couldn't make it. We made enormous progress, but we had Dr. King. And we had those in the early 60s, President Kennedy and others, that started us down, and we began to make dramatic progress on race. Haven't solved it all. And when we did, we began to knock down the barriers on gender, on religious discrimination, on ethnic discrimination, on national origin quota, on the Asian Pacific Triangle, on immigration, and also on disabilities. We've been making, and some progress on gay and lesbian discrimination against. We've been making some progress. We had the most overarching issue. We had political leaders and the American people responded. Where is it now? Where's the vision, either about where we're going, either foreign policy or domestically? How can we expect American people are going to follow, and where the hell is it? Where are we going? What is this thing? And that's the question. How are we going to deal with globalization? That's a really overarching issue and question, and we ought to be demanding, as I'm sure you will, everybody that comes here, and ask how they are going to deal with it, because that's what we ought to be trying to do. I guess we got time for a couple more. Just this group here, and then we'll... How was your sandwich, anyway? I'm glad... Thanks for offering me a bite.
Does that mean we didn't feed you? Uh-oh.
Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you very much for your many years of service to this country. But what if you could now change one of this current administration's policies? What would that be?
End the war in Iraq.
Okay.
End the war in Iraq starts off with it. That's right. I don't spend. It really, I was against it. I listened to the military personnel that all have been in combat arms. They were against it. All the politicians were going for it. They never gave the inspectors the time to do it. Rumsfeld said they're the weapons of mass destruction, east, west, north, south of Baghdad. And then when the inspectors, when they couldn't find any, but still we ran. I mean, we would go into it, the abysmal handling of it, and the abysmal now, the current kind of I mean, I've stated what I think we ought to go through the elections and begin the serious drawdown of American troops right after the elections with the hope that we can get them out by the end of 2006. I mean, I believe that there is a distinction between the insurgency and terror, and I think we're compounding this kind of problem. And really, we have to get that behind us. You know, that's a really overarching. I think there are other issues that are very, very important in foreign policy. We get to get greater focus and attention to the Middle East. We've just walked away from that. President Clinton, I thought, did very well, came very close to making progress in his final days on it. You've got Iran that's loose. We're out there talking about controlling nuclear weapons, and I'm on the Armed Services Committee, and the administration wants a smaller nuke and a bunker buster. They're talking about expanding our nuclear capability in terms of weapons, and we're trying to get the Iranians we ought to be talking to the Iranians. Iranians actually helped us in Bonn when we set up Afghanistan. They were kind of players. You got a different regime on that part. The idea that we isolate them now, we're paying the results for it. They're involved in working with Sistani and putting in technology and other terrorist kinds of materials down the south, threatening American servicemen. And of course, we've been ignoring now North Korea and the rest of it. So it's a foreign policy that I think and I think domestically we have to look at our totality in terms of our economy. We can't just keep running these extraordinary, both the deficits and healthcare and education are pretty much
Thank you.
Do the last couple.
Senator, thanks for being here today. You just touched on what I'd like to hear more information about, the reality of getting us toward an exit strategy to get us out of Iraq. You mentioned a little bit about that. Can you tell us what the reality is on Capitol Hill to move us in that direction? What's being done?
I think let me just give you a couple of interesting facts. One is that in Vietnam, in 1965, we had 140,000. We have 158,000 in Iraq today. We had 2,000 killed, but now we're 2,100. We've lost 42 in Massachusetts. So it's an interesting. I've always said of the similarity and been criticized for it. But you had in Vietnam, we thought we could have a military solution, and that is what this administration thinks is a military. In Vietnam, we had false information, and you've got false information and intelligence and false evaluations and we have the same thing. We didn't have an understanding of the culture and the history and the traditions of the Vietnamese. We don't have it with regards to the. These are, and we. My just hope is that we haven't gotten to 67 when the country really began to turn around. In 68 it had turned around, but it still took President Nixon 4 more years, and half of the names that are on that memorial in Washington were all killed after 1968. So I don't want to see this. I'm not prepared to see another another 2,000, whatever, 2,500 on this part killed. I think we have to. The North is secure. I mean, the Kurds have got that. Sistani's got the South. The people that are antagonized are the Sunnis. And what have the Sunnis got? You know the only things they've got? They've got the roads that traverse the whole country, and they've got the pipelines. Most people think that's pretty good leverage for trying to make a deal on it, except the administration. I mean, I can't spell out the part, but I know sure enough now that those people, the groups are not going to talk to each other as long as they think we're holding the bag. And they know we're holding the bag today. And as long as they believe that over a period of time. I just say finally, Vicky's nephew had 13 weeks of training. Went in from Louisiana, 13 weeks of training, and he was supposed to have 4 more weeks in Kuwait. He didn't. He's a tail gunner in Mosul. He was in Fort Lewis, Washington, but he was a Stryker vehicle. He was a tail gunner. He used to call him Pop. Been over there twice. 13 weeks of training, and we can't. We've got the best trainers in the world. We can't train. We can't train this. Part of the reason, you know why they can't train it? Because we got the ghost soldiers. Look at the GAO. Says they haven't got what Cheney has said, what the president has. They had the payday. They only had about 60% of them. The other 40% are ghost soldiers, so that the commander gets the additional pay for it. If you look at the penetration into the police force, up to 30% of the police force infiltrated by the Al-Qaeda. And who are these people going to work for? You got 30% of the graduates from the military academies never show up for graduation. Next time people see them, they see them in leading a group of insurgents out in the field. We are not. This is something that's we have to try and get our hands around, and it's not easy because it's against the background of terrorism that all of us are very, very concerned about, and that's always that was different than it was in Vietnam. But we're going to do the best we can, trying to get it there. Just a final one. Question.
Thank you, Senator. It's a pleasure to meet you today. I was raised in a very liberal, staunch Democratic household.
Good
and
for
so
you.
My father voted 3 times in his life, once for Harry Truman
one election,
and twice. No, yeah. And twice for your brothers. So I was raised in a pretty liberal household, and needless to say, the last 2 elections have been somewhat disappointing for the presidency. So I'd like to ask you, what are you and other leaders in the Democratic Party doing now to ensure that the Democratic Party gets back on message and we take this country back?
There you go. That's good. That's a good question. Let me mention one thing before I try and take a bite of that apple. I can remember I remember when I first went out for my brother in 1959. I went to Montana. I had western states, and I went to Montana. And I talked to a group of Democrats. They said, farmers down the road are going to send some delegates to go down and talk to them. So I went down and talked to them, and someone asked me a question. Fellow asked me a question. I always noticed my brother, whenever he talked to a group, he'd always ask, are there any questions? And people would get up and ask him a question. So I thought, well, I'll try it too. So I said, are there any questions? Up stood this person and they said, Mr. Kennedy, I have a question for you. How does your brother stand on 90% of parity on wheat on controlled acreage? And I had no idea. And I still don't know what the answer to that is, the part. But I remembered a story that he told when he was in the Navy before intelligence, before he went out to the PTs in the Pacific. He told the story about speaking to a factory about the dangers of sabotage in a building. And he said that if there was a fire in a factory, the workers ought to determine the origin of the fire in order to determine how to extinguish it. If the fire is made from wood, put water on it. If it's oil and gas, put CO2 on it. If it's electricity, put foam on it. But never put water on an oil and gas fire or water on an electric fire, because it's spread and have disastrous results. And so after he finished, he asked were there any questions. The person came up to the microphone and said, Mr. Kennedy, if we see a fire in the back of the hall, how are we going to know, just by looking at it, whether it's made from wood oil and gas or electricity, so we know what to put on it and what not to put on it. So it spread, and my brother thought about that and said, you know, that's a very good question, and there'll be someone here next week who'll talk on that very subject. I feel a little bit like that, this one. Let me just say, we have to do a better job. Let me say it's complicated and difficult when you don't have any of the levers, effectively the levers, the presidency, the House, the Senate. I give you the example. Look what's happened to the Justice Department in the last 4 weeks. They have the announcement that the professionals in the Justice Department rejected the redistricting in Texas. The political people came in and overrode those people, and they put that in place, and they had loss of 5 Democratic seats in Texas. Look what happened in Georgia. They put a new registration system in so that to vote in Georgia, you have to have your automobile license. It costs $25. It's a new poll tax, and the only places to get it are outside the areas where the minorities are represented. It was struck down in the Justice Department as being in violation of the Voting Rights Act, overridden by the political people that came on through that. If we had been in control of the United States Senate, I would have had a hearing that would have brought in former attorney generals and former heads of the Civil Rights Division, and we would be on all 3 networks tonight, and what the American people would understand is what the Democrats stand for in equality and opportunity and enforcement of the Justice Department. That was a lead editorial in the New York Times last Sunday, and all there is quiet, muffled oars down there about it. You're frustrated, but you're more frustrated than we are. But the one thing I give you the assurance, we will do better. I really will do better, and we'll see you out here on the campaign trail. Thank you very much. Thanks very, very much. Thanks a lot. Good. Good. Thank you. Good. Thanks very, very much. It's a great group. It's a great group.